Pretty well, thank you. Yeah, and I really appreciate that you can join us for this conversation. I know it's really a little bit rushed, and then that fits your busy schedules.
Oh, no, no, that's okay. I'm sorry for all the confusion, but I'm glad that we found the solution and really thank you for
Great.
thinking about me and for inviting me. I'm really excited about that.
Yes, yes. So you're in Poland right now, so you're
Yes, I'm in
not
Poland. I returned from DC just a few days ago, and I've already been at another conference here in Poland. So yeah, it's
oh
a little bit hectic, but it's fun.
wow, great. So you are heading back from DC a couple days ago, just a
Yeah,
couple of days
pretty much.
ago.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that. Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
What
So you
about
still
you?
have a I'm still in Hong Kong and Shenzhen, so I always will be here
Mm,
and organizing the conference. That's part of my job, and doing the consulting reports for the enterprises. Yeah,
mm,
for both like China and also the foreign enterprises for if they want to come to the Chinese markets or the
mm,
Chinese enterprises who want to go to the overseas. So that's
mm.
one of the kind of issues that we're analyzing.
Oh, I see. That's very important job, I think.
Yes. Now, shall we officially start? And I will get to
Sure.
introduce you and also this topic, this panel's topic, and then we will dive into the discussion. So,
Sure. Sounds great.
great. So, good afternoon. So, welcome to today's CGHK Insight Dialogue. My name is Sheldon Xie. I'm honored to be moderating today's discussion. For those of you who may be new our platform, so the Center for Globalization Hong Kong, or called CGHK, is committed to fostering meaningful dialogues on most pressing global issues. Our mission is to promote the nuanced and informed conversations that bridge the policy gaps, providing a platform for critical analysis and fresh perspectives on international affairs and globalizations, the region, and also the regional development as well. But today, we're delighted to have with us Dr. Antonina Vucikovic Mendes. I hope I pronounced your last name pretty well. Yeah, and a esteemed scholar whose expertise in international relations, particularly focusing on the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategies and the Chinese foreign policy, provided a unique lens for our conversations. Antonina is an assistant professor at the Jagiellonian University at Krakow, Poland, and a research fellow at the Central European Institute of Asian Studies. Her research expertise varies from security studies on Taiwan to sinology during the Cold War. I still remember, Antonina, when we first met on the Midwest Conference for Asian Affairs, MCAA in Kansas City, I think in the fall of the 2022. So you're presenting your thorough research on the China and India border disputes as a Fulbright senior scholar in the Indiana University Bloomington, as you, if my memory is correct. Yeah, over the 2 years, I still really have been so impressed by her work and presents in serious think tanks conference or the commentary from different news outlets and other academia or policy making field. Her insight on China evolving role at this current stage in the global geopolitics and the modern history, especially in this context of U.S. China competition, will greatly enrich our discussion today. Uh, the focus of today's dialogue in the future direction of the U.S. China relations under the policy outlook of the U.S. presidential candidates Kamala Harris or Donald Trump could play in a shaping this trajectory. Will the U.S. continue its current course, marked by the strategic competition or decoupling, or even you want to call it as de-risking? Or could there be a shift towards a more or less constructive engagement with China? We will be exploring how economic policy and military strategies and alliance in Europe or Asia might evolve under the different administrations. As the US stands at this crossroads, the world is closely watching. So the choices made in Washington will not only affect by bilateral ties with China, but also rip across the region, from Southeast Asia to Europe. Antonina's expertise will guide us in understanding these broader implications and potential for stability or even the tensions, depending on who take office in 2024. So, Antonina, thank you for joining us. And I'm sure this will be a really insightful and thought-provoking discussions. Without further delay, I will stop here and let's begin on hearing Antonina's your thoughts and regarding her take on the U.S. election campaign so far, and also your take on the consistency of the U.S. China policy from Trump first term to Biden's and beyond. Yeah,
Hello,
Antonina, over to you.
Sheldon. Thank
Yeah.
you. Good afternoon to you. Good morning from Poland. First of
Yes.
all, Sheldon, I would like to really thank you for inviting me. I was so excited when you reached out to me. You have an amazing memory, I must say, and you have amazing Polish
Yes.
pronunciation. It was just impeccable. I know that the Polish part of my surname is always a big challenge to non-Polish speakers, but it was just perfect. So maybe you should
Oh
think
yeah.
about starting to learn Polish language professionally.
Yeah,
So
sure.
as a matter of fact, I returned from Washington, D.C. just a few days ago. I spent 1 month over there, and I had a chance to have meetings with wide range of think tanks based in D.C. and even some policymakers and people who had some experience in working in the governmental institutions. Well, I think it's more than a $1 million question who will win those elections, a $1 billion question, or maybe $1 trillion question. And to be very frank with you, Sheldon, nobody knows. It's all about the hopes and predictions. Some people are more or less optimistic from their point of view, of course, because those opinions are very much divided. Nonetheless, this is really the, reading tea leaves, let's say. Mainly because of the swing states, right? Because there are states in which the situation is pretty clear. However, there are a few swing states, such as Pennsylvania, which is probably the most important one because of the number of electoral votes. This is strictly connected to the type of that democratic system in the United States, which is sometimes very difficult to explain to people from other democratic Western countries, like people from Poland, let's say, when one vote is one vote, right? So in the final calculation. So simply speaking, a person who got more votes wins. In the US, this is not necessarily so. Let us not forget that Hillary Clinton in general, in total, got more individual votes. I believe it was 2 million votes more than Donald Trump. And yet it was Donald Trump who was appointed as a US president because of this kind of very complicated electoral system. So basically, there are states which are in a way more important in final calculations, right? Because they carry more weight in this final calculation who will get to the White House. So this one of the things maybe why some people actually raise questions, is America a really democratic country, right? In this traditional sense of this word. So apart from Pennsylvania, we have states such as North Carolina, for instance, which is also on the edge. We have states such as Wisconsin. It is important to stress that Wisconsin neighbors Minnesota. So they're kind of, let's say, Midwestern twins, you might say, very close to one another. And we have a vice presidential Democratic candidate from Minnesota, Tim Walz. And he might also perhaps encourage people from Wisconsin and other Midwestern states to vote for this tandem of Harris-Walz, because let us also remember in American politics, it's also about a tandem, not just one person who is running for the office. And this vice presidential candidate can also decide, about the outcome of the elections. As a matter of fact, on 1st of October, so less than 1 week from now, we will have the vice presidential debate between Tim Walz and G.D. Vance, who is the Republican vice presidential candidate. So in sum, we truly don't know. If you look at, one think tank or some analyzing body, they will say probably Harris has more chance right now because surely she's on the wave, right? So she had this very, very, well, kind of impetus, because of the last presidential debate. And let us not forget about such crazy, you might say, but very important elements such as Taylor Swift support that this
Yes.
famous American pop star, presented, and she openly embraced the idea of President Harris, as the first female president of the United States. So truly, we have no idea how that will go. We still have over 1 month, and 1 month can be forever, can be eternity in politics.
Great. Thank you, Antonina. I think there's a lot of great things we can go deeper, and I really appreciate your such a thorough observation. It's also a really fresh observation from Washington, D.C. And you're right, it is really complicated kind of system. Even your question about whether it is a democratic system, of course, one vote is not one vote. And in the American presidential election, during the election, because they have the electoral votes. So which means that they were not counted that it is a winners take all kind of a system from the swing state. So that's really complicated. But I still want to mention a little bit further on some kind of uncertainties on this election. And as you mentioned, it's really divided and also is really complicated. And also Trump has get shot at like during this campaign. And also I heard the latest news, if you were following that, the Paris Trump campaign office also get shot at, like that seems like really really like not really normal in the past. So I really want to ask that how does really this kind of uncertainty can impact on the U.S. election, and how should we what's your take on that, Anthony?
Indeed, I would say that situation is pretty tense. So we had at least one big, if not two, attempts of the assassination of Donald Trump.
Yes.
So this is something that really shows to us that there is a lot of violence right now
Yes.
in America and in general. So the situation is very tense. Well, let us of course not forget that America is a huge country. I often tell to my students that it's not. To me, it's not really a country, it's more like a continent, right? Because if you look from
Yes.
European perspective, like every state is pretty much like a country when it comes to the size, when it comes to even its internal laws, because there are some federal laws, but there are also certain regulations on the state level, which can be completely different. Like it's very hard in this regard to compare California with New York or Indiana with Kansas, where we met. As you remember and as you mentioned during a conference 2 years ago. So that makes this picture quite complex and quite complicated. Actually, I think we should also, when it comes to this uncertainty, we should also touch base on this, well, not white elephant in the room anymore, because everybody is now talking about the U.S. China dynamics, right? And this is probably, as this debate demonstrated, one of the main issues and the main challenges for the new president who will be appointed in January next year, but who will be elected in November. Interestingly, it was Donald Trump who was talking about China more, and it was really fascinating to see how he was trying to convince the audience that China will pay us. China will pay us. How will China pay Americans? Because he is going to impose some extra sanctions. He's going to go even more tough on China. And basically his message, of course, as always simplified, as in Trump's rallies and speeches, China will basically be paying to American people, which is, let's be frank, it is nonsense from economic point of view, because that's not how tariffs work, and that's not how sanctions work, right? So basically, the more tariffs you put on imported good, the higher prices you get inside your own country. Because the thing is like this, it won't be China or Chinese government or whoever paying, to American people. American companies importing those goods from China to the US will have to pay those 20, 60, 100% more, because Trump also had these kind of grand ideas, And of course,
Yes.
they will not be willing to pay it out of their own pocket. They will probably pass this cost on to the consumers. So in the end of the day, it will be normal American people paying more for those products. And America is not self-sustainable. I mean, we live in a globalized world. We cannot just rely on our own domestic products, right? We have to have exchange with all countries around the world. China is no exception. America is no exception, right? We live in a very
Yes.
close network these days. It's not Cold War era. As a matter of fact, even
Yeah.
in the Cold War era, we did have those connections. Another myth that everybody was kind of, categorized or put in some blocks. I mean, there were some interactions, but now it's even more, much more. So basically, my point is that there are some calculations. Various research bodies have presented their estimates that if those tariffs were really introduced by Trump, probably an average American family would have to pay yearly from $2,000 to $4,000 more on buying everyday products, everyday goods, or electronics, or whatever. So we can see that what Trump is saying, it sounds very attractive, right? So it's very, very attractive to possibly not very well educated reader who is not that sharp and maybe suspicious to realize that there is a lot of manipulation in that kind of simplified statements. But let's be frank, this is not how things would work.
Awesome. Antonina. I think I totally agree with that. The tariffs is not it's not a good thing even for American people. Like they were raising their higher prices of the everyday goods, and also that's not good for the healthy U.S.-China relations. But I want to go back to the points that you made, like in the opening remarks on, because you said like the vice president also really matters on this China policy making. So and you mentioned the team walls. So I want to get one step deeper. Like, how do you think like the personnel in both kind of teams were making, and what's your kind of observation or key figures that can be in either Trump or Harris team can shaping the China policy? Because the team was, as we all know, and if you are doing the background check, he has a really strong and fruitful China background, and he and his family like also have some connections on, also have education grants to China since the 1990s. So that's really really rare to the presidential candidates or vice presidential candidates. So and also other kind of key political figures that's in the either Trump or Harris team has some kind of influential impact on this policy making on the China policy. So I want to hear more about your kind of observation on that, Antonina.
That's a very good point, Sheldon. And I
Yes.
absolutely agree that if you want to develop U.S.-China relations, you need people from both sides, who know a lot
Yes.
about each other's countries, right? So you need people on the Chinese side who maybe were educated in the U.S. or were some exchanges with the United States, and the other way around, right? So one of the biggest challenges to me as a researcher, as a person who works in the academia, is this cutting down academic cooperation between various countries, including the US, with China. So saying that, well, we cannot do the exchange programs because of some controversies, how we perceive certain issues going on in China,
Yes.
So we have to be careful. We should not accept Chinese students, or we should not send our students to China, or professors and scholars. There is some logic into it, but the outcome, the long-term outcome, is that in the end of the day, we won't know anything about one another. We won't know anything about
Yes.
each other because there will be simply no people in Europe or in the West, broadly speaking, who have experience with China, who speak Chinese language, who have traveled around
Yes.
China. Um, Right, and the other way around, of course. So it has to be balanced. We also need Chinese students, professors, scholars, politicians, policymakers going to Europe, going to the West, and having those interactions. So that's why what you were saying about Tim Walz is very, very, very important. But I think that the very heart, the very core of this policy making when it comes to U.S.-China relations will be in the hands of the Secretary of State. So somebody who in European terms is like the Minister of Foreign Affairs, right? So this is a person who's responsible for America's foreign relations and those international affairs. And here we don't know who that would be if Trump comes to power, who that would be if Kamala Harris comes to power. When it comes to Trump, well, we heard a lot about how he was eager to fire people who are not doing well during his last term, so on and so forth. And we know how many people who worked in his White House and who officially and openly supported him last time are now voting for Kamala Harris. It's like a long list of Republicans who openly declared their support for Kamala Harris because they do not want Donald Trump to come to power again. Including Dick Cheney, you know, the former vice president. So these are really, really big names, and it actually tells a lot. When it comes to Democratic team, of course, there are several names. Well, not really on the, in the public debate. They're probably more of rumors. I heard about Kurt Campbell. I heard about people like Senator Chris Van Hollen, who also has a vast international experience. As a matter of fact, he was even born in Pakistan, not in the United States, because his father was also the ambassador to several countries. He was later ambassador to Sri Lanka. So from the young age, he was kind of, multicultural and multinational, so which could also make a big difference. However, that would be probably a key person. And the last note here in this part of our discussion, generally there is a feeling that Kamala Harris wants to bring her own people. What does it mean? That she does not intend to tap into the Biden administration. So these people who work for the Biden administration, the current Biden administration, will probably have to find new jobs, perhaps part of them, perhaps most of them. But basically, Kamala Harris wants to have her own legacy. And if you want to have your own legacy, you bring your own people with fresh perspectives. She wants to make a new start so that she is not just perceived as a continuation of Biden. She wants to be just Kamala Harris with her own legacy.
Great. That's really impressive. I have heard, and based on my analysis and also like a lot of think tank reports, they argues that Harris will mostly will continue Biden's legacy, and also they will have a lot of consistency in the foreign policy, especially from the U.S.-China relation, because Kamala Harris don't have too many real experience in the U.S.-China relations or the China policy, because he just met President Xi Jinping like I think in the APEC just once, and represent President Biden to having the coalition meeting with their Asian Pacific alliance, like South Korea and Japan or other Southeast Asian countries. So that's like really a little bit shocking. That's like Harris want a really fresh start and different from the Biden administration. That's a really kind of really impressive, and then we will see like in after the election if she wins and how her teams will line up. But I have another kind of a following up questions on the tariffs and also the technology rivalry, because you were mentioning the tariffs, and a lot of business community either in China and the U.S. were worried about so much on especially the tariffs on the electrical vehicles, and that's how will impact on the trade relations, and also whether it will weakening the U.S. competitiveness and the innovations, because we have to admit that the tariffs and also the restricting the Chinese access to certain technology, as you can see in the House bills, we're having some limiting the access on the biological informations and also the high chips on access to the Chinese companies who could backfires and the weakening the U.S. competitiveness and innovations. So how can the U.S. manage the technological rivalry with China without undermining its own innovations in ecosystem, like in the either Trump or the Harris term?
Oh, that's a very complex situation and issue because we have
Mhm,
several aspects to that. Well, first of all, of course, China has been accused by the
mhm,
U.S. of stealing intellectual property,
mhm,
and well, this is one of probably the biggest challenges in China-U.S.
mhm,
relations. But on the other hand, we have to remember that sometimes it's not just this intellectual theft going from the US to
mhm,
China. Let us not remember that the best and
mhm,
brightest Chinese
mhm,
students often move to the United States and then they stay and
mhm,
work for American companies. So maybe in this case, we should actually talk about the brain drain going from China to America, right? Of course, right
mhm,
now it's kind of reverse situation going on, and many Chinese professionals, engineers, scholars who are well established in
mhm.
America are going back to China, perhaps
Yes.
because of various reasons. One of the things is they are offered well, the offer from Chinese side is better in financial terms, right? And let us be frank, we're just human beings, we have families, we have to
Mhm,
think about these things in our everyday life. Another thing is
mhm,
that some of Chinese
mhm,
engineers, professionals who live in the US, they complain
mhm,
that they have been feeling this kind of, well, not hostility,
mhm,
but they felt that American side is kind of suspicious of their activity, and they're
mhm,
feeling that they are on the radar as potential agents or spies, technological
mhm.
spies,
Yeah.
and because of that very unfriendly atmosphere, they decide to go back to China. So this is definitely
Yeah.
something to be solved or approached in a different manner.
Mhm,
If America wants to keep those best and brightest of Chinese origin in their own country,
mhm,
there are a lot of issues both American side and on the Chinese side. And
mhm,
I'm not really sure whether it's also the matter of the government itself, right? I mean, if you want to
mhm,
have this very productive cooperation, things should be also left in the hands of those companies, right? I mean, as much
mhm,
freedom and liberty as possible. That would probably also create a more
mhm,
vibrant environment, right? So
mhm,
as I said, it's a very complex matter. And you mentioned this, reluctance to, for example, import electric cars to the United States. The
mhm,
same problem is across Europe, right? These
mhm.
days, we have a
Yes.
huge debate going on in the European Union whether we should really, open up the doors for electric cars coming from
Yes.
China.
Mm,
And you can see that we have clashes and different opinions within the EU itself. So surely
mhm,
Germany is the one who is most pro-Chinese in this matter. Why? Because Germany, of course, has the strongest ties with China
mhm,
in this regard, right? So
mhm,
German companies are very much have this cooperation with the Chinese firms.
mhm,
So from the German perspective, that would be most beneficial. But in other parts of
mhm,
Europe, maybe not necessarily, right? Because we have other local companies, domestic companies,
mhm,
and for them, this would be a
mhm.
huge competition, right? And maybe even a killer
Yes.
to our domestic market. So
Mhm,
in what is very important, I think, in this debate is to put your feelings and emotions aside, right? So let's
mhm,
understand that, of course, every country has its own interests, and let's
mhm,
try to be rational about it, but also let's
mhm,
try, rationally speaking, to find a solution which would be a win-win situation for all.
mhm,
But those emotions, I'm afraid, sometimes
mhm,
blur the situation or cloud the whole situation. And
mhm,
my impression was that in the last few years, we could see a lot of unnecessary tensions stemming from
mhm,
emotions in China-US
mhm.
relations.
Yes, that's as you said. Like, I think it is a really unnecessary kind of emotions, or that's kind of feelings, because that's something they need. I know like the political leaders need an excuse that's like the unemployment rates were can be accused of the pressure from the outside. So that's like they're one of their strategies that can win the votes and win the support from the especially the roster belt votes. So that's kind of like their strategies. But do you think any things or any possibility that can lower the tension on the tariffs or the kind of tariffs issues if like either Harris or Trump were get elected? Because I know Trump was really has wants like 60% of the tariffs on all the Chinese products, and then like Harris maybe have some possibility or they will continue on its the Biden's policy as we said before. Even she wants like a brand new start, but if but she's also the vice president of the Biden administration so far. So, whether have you seen any new possibility that he will get beyond the small yard high defense kind of this approach to China's U.S. China trade issues?
So I think we've already touched upon it, and we kind of got to the conclusion that a lot will depend on other people who will be present in the administration, whether it's Harris or Trump. Because let us remember, it's not just the president himself or herself who will be drafting all those bills and getting all those ideas, right? It's simply impossible. This is just the tip of the iceberg. You have a big cohort of people, specialists, economists, policymakers, lawyers even, who have to be involved in all those processes. So it's really crucial to see who will later be involved in those, all those departments. And this will depend whether these people are have more kind of hawkish attitude, or maybe they're more cooperative. Maybe they have some experience in China, or with Chinese companies, or with Chinese people, or not. So all these things will really matter. My fear is that because so many people have already left the Trump camp, let's say, he will have to tap into new environments. And these environments tend to be pretty extreme in ideological understanding. Extreme both when it comes to domestic American matters, but also when it comes to international politics. Well, for sure, Trump has always been talking about America first and making America great again. Now it's just great again. See, now it's just he's just using those two words instead of four words because he's even more simplifying his message, to kind of get this connection with the voters across the country and then propose the most simple and attractive solutions. So my fear is that perhaps he might later on hire people who have absolutely no experience in policy making, international affairs, national business, name it. I have in this regard, at least, I have more optimism when it comes to possible Harris administration, that perhaps there would be more professionals with true rich experience, and that experience might surely help.
Great, and thank you for your take on that. I hope that this kind of optimism can have some can be make a difference. Like if Harris can bring the new kind of people and especially the professional expertise or practitioners on this to get along these issues, that will be a new. We will have a flip the page and it will be getting to a new era of the U.S.-China relations. I hope so. But now I think we were gonna dive into the Taiwan and Indo-Pacific policy issues, and I think that's your expertise, Antonina. I'm sure that you remember like Trump has a really important quote on Taiwan, like given the Trump's transactional approach to Taiwan, and he asked Taiwan to pay their defense on his own defense, as seen in his recent comments. And what kind of impact could this have on the U.S. commitments from the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy in this region, especially in the Taiwan Strait? And would Harris administration likely to provide a stable assurance to Taiwan? And given to the bigger context, like although I know that in Washington, some hawkish voices in China appears eager to anticipate a use of force from the mainland China, and most experts were still have the uh, agree that President Xi will still see a military conflict over Taiwan is a crisis to be avoided rather than an opportunity to be exploited because it's economic issues on the domestic sphere. So, what's your forecast and what's your take on the Taiwan issues after the presidential elections?
Thank you for that very important question, Sheldon. And I absolutely
Yeah.
agree with you that
Mhm.
this possible invasion of Taiwan could be a
Mhm.
disaster, and not just when it comes to
Mhm.
Chinese economy, but it would probably disrupt the whole world because we
Mhm.
know how important to the world trade the Taiwan Strait is, right? How many goods
Yes.
actually go through the Taiwan Strait. Plus, of course, this
Mhm.
disruption across the world, when it comes to
Mhm.
U.S.-China relations. And well, nobody wants a third world war, I suppose. Well, I shouldn't say
Mhm.
nobody because there are, of course, lobbyists and people who work in
Mhm.
various military companies who produce military equipment. For them, probably it would be a
Mhm.
very, they would get lots of
Mhm.
profits from the war. But
Mhm.
most of reasonable people in the world do not want third
Mhm.
world war to happen, right? But anyway,
Yes.
coming back to your question, it's kind of funny to hear how
Mhm.
Trump is saying Taiwan should pay. Well,
Mhm.
Taiwan is already paying. That's the thing.
Mhm.
American involvement or engagement in the Taiwan Strait is not about the goodwill of Washington.
Mhm.
It's not some sort of charity or aid, or
Mhm. Yes.
whatever. Taiwan is paying for all the
Mhm.
equipment, military equipment that it's importing from the United States to
Mhm.
Taiwan. Of course, there are some trainings going on, and there are
Mhm.
some American
Mhm.
military specialists involved and present in Taiwan and sharing their
Mhm.
expertise and some guidelines with the Taiwanese side.
Mhm.
Nonetheless, this is indeed based on
Mhm.
money, right? So Taiwan
Mhm.
is paying for its own security, just like
Mhm.
other NATO states in Europe
Mhm.
are paying to America for their
Mhm.
security. And that's another
Mhm.
thing that Trump has been criticizing
Mhm.
many, many times
Mhm.
over and over and again when it comes to the budgets of other NATO
Mhm.
members. And let's
Mhm.
be frank, I mean, of course, if for some reason the US withdrew from NATO, there would be no NATO
Mhm.
anymore. Let's be absolutely clear about that. America is
Yes.
absolutely the foundation of NATO, and we
Mhm.
cannot go without it.
Mhm.
Nonetheless, countries like Poland, for example, my native
Mhm.
country, is paying at least 2% of
Mhm.
their yearly budget of GDP,
Mhm. Mhm.
for military matters, right? So for
Mhm.
defense.
Mhm.
Actually, there are even plans. I've recently heard our prime minister saying that there are plans that
Mhm.
maybe it might rise to
Mhm.
4.7%. 4.7%
Mhm.
or 5% of our yearly budget will be spent on defense matters. So you can
Yes.
see that it's not a decrease, we are increasing
Mhm.
our spending on
Mhm.
defense. Maybe not because of the Taiwan issue, but of course that would
Mhm.
impact the whole world, including Poland and
Mhm.
other countries in Europe. But because
Yes.
of what's happening on our eastern border, so that is the
Mhm.
Russian invasion of Ukraine, and this
Yes.
is how I'm completing the circle because I wanted to talk about China's involvement in this matter, which is also
Mhm.
crucial to both Europe and the United States.
Mhm.
So it is no secret that China has been a helpful hand to Vladimir
Mhm.
Putin. China is importing gas and oil from Russia
Mhm.
to the larger extent than ever before in history.
Mhm.
So we can see that this is really a lifeline to
Mhm.
Vladimir Putin, and that's how this Russia can still go on. Plus, of
Mhm.
course, we have some neutral or sometimes more friendly gestures from China, from Beijing, from time to time when it comes to the Putin's regime. But
Mhm.
and there are also some suspicions that perhaps even some Chinese equipment is present right now in the Russian
Mhm.
army and it is being used by
Mhm.
Russian soldiers in Ukraine and so on and so forth.
Mhm.
But what is even more interesting for me, what's going on right now, is China's relations with Belarus.
Mhm.
So it is kind of proxy conflict, proxy friendship, whatever you want to call it, because it's not that obvious as relations between Beijing and Moscow. It's a little bit more blurred, again, blurred, because a few weeks ago, we had this new agreement signed between China and Belarus about the unprecedented great partnership. So again, a new opening, supposed to be a new opening in China-Belarus relations. Although I've recently spoke to a Washington-based scholar originally from Belarus, and she told me that she has no idea how relations between China and Belarus can be even more friendly, because they were already so friendly that it's just impossible to think about, improving them more. So that's kind of interesting perspective. But from the perspective of the EU, and surely from the perspective of DC as well, this is something quite concerning, because a few months ago, we also had military drills, joint military exercises between Chinese and Belarusians, a few kilometers away from the Polish border. Polish border, which in this context also a border of the EU and also the border of NATO. So this, from the EU perspective, this is an issue to be kind of concerned about, because we can see tightening relations not just between Russia and China, but also between Belarus and China. Which means that right now we as in Europeans or EU members, we have Chinese presence not far away, 8 hours away when it comes to the flight. We have the Chinese presence, Chinese military presence, just a few kilometers away from the NATO and EU border. So this is a truly new geopolitical situation. We don't know where it will go. I joked when I was in DC, I joked. I don't know if it's a joke, actually, but today it's still a joke, that who knows, maybe in 2 years we will have Chinese military bases in Belarus. So keep that in mind and check in 10 years whether it came true or not.
That's really interesting. I didn't expect like the Belarus and China will have a really close relationship as you observed, because we all know like China only have the one kind of a friendship with without the limits is Russia, so with Moscow. So that's totally kind of a new signals to the Chinese foreign policy and all even you want to say like the priorities of the China's in the kind of a Europe continent. So yeah, that's a good kind of signals that we need to carefully watch in the near future. But I still want to get deeper on the alliance coalitions related questions, because as you mentioned, that's a totally uncertain, Antonina. But as we can see, like if the Trump or Harris when they get elected, they will have a totally divergent approach on the coalitions. So especially on the NATO's or EU, like Trump will not definitely, but with the highly possibilities will withdraw or get a like less fundings on this coalitions buildings, especially to many like U.S. alliance in the Indo-Pacific and across the Atlantic. So I still want to have a go deeper more on this question, is that like many U.S. alliance right now prefer not to take sides of the U.S. and China competition so far, especially for the even the European countries and also the Southeast Asian countries or the Asia Pacific alliance like Japan or South Korea. And that's the thing. And also, if the U.S. were not take the lead or the Trump administration wants to having a, as we said, like Jacksonian approach, where all withdrawing its support or the coalition buildings and then not take a lead on this alliance buildings under the Trump administration. How does world geopolitics can be what kind of influence on the right now is the crisis, especially the Ukraine crisis so far, and also the other side effect on the Middle East, even if you want to have some comments on that. So I think that's the concern I want to have to consult with you, and also we can go that deeper that's kind of possibility if that's these coalitions have this uncertainty will come after the elections.
Mm-hmm. That's a very good question. And
Mhm.
indeed, I think all eyes should be on Ukraine right now and what will happen just
Mhm.
after the elections, because everything else will be kind of determined what happens in Ukraine.
Mhm.
Trump has been promising that, oh, if he comes to power, he will solve the Ukrainian issue even before he's officially appointed as the U.S. President. He will make a few phone
Yes.
calls and all this war will be open. Well, I suppose, all the real professionals were just raising their eyebrows, because that's not how
Mhm.
things work. Well, of course, I mean, it is a threat again from the
Mhm.
Central and Eastern European perspective, because
Mhm.
what does that mean to end a war in Ukraine in 2 weeks? Well, that would
Mhm.
probably mean either giving Ukraine away to Russia,
Mhm.
and that would mean that we, again, Central Europe, Eastern Europe, we would have Russian troops on our eastern border. There would be no buffer
Mhm.
zone left. And that is, of
Mhm.
course, the main security threat to countries like Poland,
Mhm.
to Slovakia, to Baltic countries, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia,
Mhm.
who are already bordering Russia, right? So,
Mhm.
I mean, geographically speaking, that would not make any change to them. However, that would definitely encourage Putin to go further west.
Mhm.
Because he would realize where in the end of the day he got exactly what he wanted, not how fast he wanted, because he wanted to have these things done within 72 hours as he was promised by his own military leaders.
Mhm.
And we are already more than 2 years from that moment, and we know that it wasn't resolved that quickly. And again, it wasn't resolved that quickly because of the American involvement, right? So Americans shared
Mhm.
some important intelligence data with Ukrainians and offered some military and intelligence support. And that is why Ukraine
Mhm.
managed to defend its independence. Of course, part of the country is occupied by Russia. Nonetheless, Kiev is still there, right? And authorities in
Mhm.
Kiev, democratically elected, are still there. So
Mhm.
we can see how crucial it was. Without that American involvement, there would be no democratic Ukraine anymore.
Mhm.
What else can it mean? It can mean that Ukraine will be pushed to negotiate with Russia and maybe
Mhm.
accept the status quo. So perhaps
Mhm.
some of the territories which are currently under the control of Russia will stay as
Mhm.
part of Russian territory. So not just the
Mhm.
Crimea, which is, the case which started 10 years ago,
Mhm.
but even those eastern regions of Ukraine, right? So pretty much we are
Yes.
talking about the partition of Ukraine. And
Mhm.
again, history taught us a lot of lessons that we are not always regrettably following. I mean, remember what
Mhm.
was happening in the 1930s with Hitler,
Yes.
and how even, the British believed that, oh, we are bringing peace to Europe and to the world by giving away Czechoslovakia, to Hitler. And
Mhm.
we know that this is not where Hitler stopped. He went further, right? He
Mhm.
attacked Poland on 1st of September 1939,
Mhm.
and we know what followed, right? The Second
Mhm.
World War followed. So the problem is with these kind of people is they never stop and they are never fully satisfied, right? So we have to keep that
Mhm.
in mind when it comes to the Ukrainian context.
Mhm.
If Harris comes to power in this regard, I suppose we will have the continuation of what
Mhm.
Biden has been doing.
Mhm.
So the continuation of the flow of this military support, military aid
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
Ukraine, because Harris administration would understand that it is not just about Ukraine itself. It's about the
Mhm.
whole NATO alliance. It's about the stability and security in Europe,
Mhm.
and by default also the United States. Again, history teaches us a
Mhm.
lesson. US wanted to stay away from the First World War. It did for some time,
Mhm.
but in the end of the day, it had to join. US wanted to
Mhm.
stay away from the Second World War, right? It did not get
Mhm.
involved in 1939 and 1940.
Mhm.
It had to be the Japanese attack, right? And in Hawaii
Mhm.
to, well, force the United States to join the Second World War in the end of the day. So
Mhm.
we can see that even though US wants to stay away from world affairs
Mhm.
and world problems, in the end of the day,
Mhm.
for its own interest, for its own benefit, it would have to get involved. And I think this is the main difference of
Mhm.
understanding of things in Harris administration and possibly Trump's new administration, because Trump
Mhm.
talks about America first. But there
Yes.
cannot be America first with America's strong position
Mhm.
internationally. that you cannot just isolate itself like China did, historically speaking. Again, we know from history, Chinese empire was isolating itself for some centuries, and then it was forced to open up, right? And we know that this a century of humiliation followed, and so on and so forth. So yeah,
Yes.
I think we should look more into history to understand how we should act these days.
Great. That's really thorough, like especially thorough analysis on this the Ukraine-Russian conflict. Is speculations on how about this Trump or Harris administration will respond to that. I think that's total. They have a different totally approach on this kind of issues, and I hope so. Like, if Harris will get elected, they will still have the strong commitments on the U.S. presence on this Europe, and especially from the European perspective and the U.S. perspective. And then I think we have just nearly 10 minutes left. I think we can get a little bit in-depth questions on the U.S. consensus on the China policy, though, and also we will have a general reflection on this to wrap up this conversations. I think that like there seems to be a growing like bipartisan consensus on tough on China approach, and also like this kind of consensus were actually stemmed from this the national security threats. So do you see this instability or the stability of this consensus where has the potential of the weakness on the U.S. policy towards China, and also this national security threats were still pushing China away to cooperate in other global affairs like Russian-Ukraine conflict or the Middle East conflict? Of course, that's this kind of consensus were really deep rooted in the national security threat. So that's one kind of worrisome things that I really cared about. Like if the new presidential administration will come to the office. So I really want to hear, Antonina's, your thoughts on that.
Thank you for highlighting that, Sheldon, because that's sometimes a thing that we forget about. But in democracies, we always have those clashing opinions, right? And sometimes maybe a president has one vision, but things cannot go through the Congress, right? Because that's how the system works. Certain bills have to go first to the Congress to be then signed into law by the president. So it's not that president can do anything that he or she wants, right? So there are certain mechanisms. As a matter of fact, it's also the case in China. We just don't see those clashes of opinions within the Chinese Communist Party, but there are some factions, right? And there are different opinions going on. We just don't highlight them in newspapers and website portals because it's kind of happening behind the door. In democratic countries, it's all on the plate, right? And everybody can see how those clashes are playing out. Nonetheless, indeed, we do have many matters in the US which Democrats and Republicans don't agree on. But indeed, I think what we have is a consensus on the Taiwan issue. Consensus in a way that America wants to keep Taiwan, Republic of China, as it is. Right. So we have very clear declarations several times from Joe Biden so far that America does not want the so-called Taiwan independence. Which is a tricky term. Even with my Taiwanese friends and scholars, I've been raising this matter because they're even themselves using this issue. But I was telling them, hey, you consider yourself as an independent country already. That's their perspective, right? So why do you talk about Taiwanese independence in the future, right? You should probably change the word because it's really, really confusing. But you know what it means, right? It means basically just abandoning this Republic of China legacy and creating the Taiwan Republic, perhaps, or Taiwanese Republic, or whatever. But from the U.S. perspective, we probably can say that both Republicans and Democrats want to keep Taiwan as it is, a democracy, not under the control
mm,
of Beijing. Again,
mhm,
probably not for the love of Taiwan and Taiwanese bubble tea and other
mhm,
inventions of the people of Taiwan, but
mm,
because of America's own interests, security interests. We know that if
mm,
Taiwan was taken over by the PRC and
mm,
incorporated truly, like
mhm.
really into the
Yes.
PRC, that would mean the end of domination of the United States in the Western
Mhm,
Pacific. And it would open up the windows for China to
mhm,
expand its influences
mhm,
in
mhm,
military terms, right? So
mhm,
that would really be the end of the American hegemony in the whole Indo-Pacific
mhm,
region. So
mm,
from the American perspective, I think that there is no way it can be interpreted in a different way. It's just a
mhm,
question to what extent America wants to truly get involved in case of various
mhm,
scenarios, right? So what
mhm,
happens if China in future, let's say, decides to
mhm,
block Taiwan? Because and
mhm.
that's another thing, right?
Yes.
People across the world are very excited when you talk about
Mhm,
Chinese invasion of Taiwan.
mhm.
But probably this
Yes.
is not the best and most probable solution, right? If China wants to do anything, because that's another question. Does China really want to do anything drastic, right? Or not? Again,
Yes.
for its own stability,
Mhm,
right? And for its own interests.
mhm,
But if, let's say, think about theoretically speaking, another scenario, China really
mhm,
decides to take over Taiwan in one way or
mhm,
another. In full-scale
mm,
invasion is one solution, but another solution is
mhm,
blockade. That would be
mm,
also a lesson from history, because back in the
mhm,
1950s, it was Taiwan, Chiang Kai-shek, who was trying to
mhm,
block China from
mm,
import-export through the sea routes.
mhm,
And I even wrote an article about how Polish sailors back in the mid
mhm,
1950s, who were on the same cargo ships, they had the joint Polish-Chinese crew, they were
mhm,
actually stopped and arrested by the Taiwanese, and they were even, held in captivity for 1 year in the island of Taiwan because of that
mhm,
maritime blockade. So this time we're
mhm,
talking about the reverse situations, a possibility that it will be the PRC trying to isolate Taiwan literally by air and by sea from the rest of the world, which
mhm.
would probably force
Yes.
Taiwan to
Mhm,
negotiations, or maybe
mm,
it would prompt America and Japan to step in and try
mhm,
to, crush this blockade by military
mhm,
force. We don't
mm,
know. What I'm trying to say is that there are many scenarios on that we have on the table. And
mhm,
when we talk about future, everything is possible. Nonetheless, to
mhm,
come back to your question, I believe that there is much stronger consensus, bipartisan consensus in the United States that Taiwan has to
mhm,
be kept for American
mhm,
interests,
mhm,
rather than when we talk about Ukraine, because in Ukraine we see Harris, Trump have
mm,
totally different visions of how these things
mhm,
should be handled. The same Middle
mhm,
East, probably Trump would be
mhm,
much pro-Israeli than the Harris
mhm,
administration, which naturally
mhm,
America cannot go without
mhm.
Israel. These ties are very
Yes.
tight and quite obvious.
Mhm,
However, we can see
mhm.
that the current Biden administration is not very pleased by what Netanyahu has been doing and how he has been handling this conflict. And
Yes.
Democrats do see human rights violations
Mhm,
or even crimes committed by
mhm,
Israeli forces on Palestinian
mhm,
people. So again,
mhm,
this support would be there, whatever happens. But probably the
mhm,
way Washington would be approaching it and would be
mhm,
talking about it and the extent of the support
mm.
for Israel would be different.
Wow, thank you, Antonina. I think that's you're great. You're great on this kind of issues. Like I know the bipartisan consensus in either in the House, U.S. House and the Senate will really have this strong consensus on what we have to crash Taiwan. But like we still don't know. Like we're still uncertain on whether the conflict will come to in occasion. So uh, that's where we need to be more careful, be more careful about that. But I have one thing to follow up because uh, right now we have a really a fierce and we already would describe it as a really a fierce end game of the U.S. China competition. So Especially on the Taiwan side, the Lai government or the Democratic Progressive Party has been taking office, like they were getting elected, and it seems like getting more aggressive or on and not, which is not like preferred by the mainland China, and it seems like have some possibility to have to get this tension more and growing increasingly. So that's one of the issues. So do you think the new administration of the United States can find a way to coexist coexist with the China and also having some or will break the kind of bring this tension, this more break up the tension and also have the clash on the Taiwan Strait. So that's the kind of follow-up question on you, and I hope that you can elaborate a little bit more because that's from the Taiwan government perspective. Like, is it still possible, or it still has some possibility to coexistence between these two great powers of the U.S. and China to stay or maintain this status quo here?
I give a great credit to you, Sheldon, for bringing us this matter, because
Yes.
sometimes in those discussions about Taiwan, we forget about Taiwan itself, right? We talk about,
Yes.
Taiwan as a just pawn on the chessboard
Mm,
of this rivalry between China and US, and we forget about
mm,
what people in Taiwan think and how the policymakers in Taiwan itself act. So
mm,
I would say that, of course, we have this discrepancy between DPP and KMT, right?
mm.
The main two
Yes.
parties. I mean, there's a third one, but I think we are still
Mm,
talking about the mainly bipartisan
mm.
system in Taiwan,
Yes.
nonetheless. So, of course, KMT has this long tradition, right, of contacts with the
Mm,
mainland China. And in this regard, you can call them a little bit more pro-Chinese, but that
mhm,
pro-Chineseness is more about being less, as you said, aggressive and
mm,
maybe less vocal about Taiwan
mhm,
as a independent entity from the
mm,
PRC, right? And of course,
mhm,
let us not forget, these are also personal contacts between those
mm,
very experienced politicians on both sides of the Taiwan Strait, right?
mm,
Because again, we sometimes forget that we are not talking about
mm,
some robots or AI controlling
mm,
international relations. These are people,
mhm,
human beings during the meetings, negotiations. We have our ambitions. We like one person, we don't like another person, and all these things do matter. I would say
yes.
that it would be a little bit too much to call the DPP stance aggressive.
Mhm,
Indeed, President Lai Ching-te used to be much more, well, he was more eager and more in favor of
mhm,
talking about Taiwan
mm,
independence in the future, in long term.
mhm,
During the
mm,
elections, in the election time, he kind of softened his narrative because he was appealing
mm,
to the
mm,
bigger part of the society, which, according to
mm,
the research, supports the consensus, present day status
mhm,
quo, because
mm,
even though most of the people living in Taiwan declare they're even Taiwanese or they have a mixed Taiwanese Chinese identity, right? So, in terms of
mhm,
what they feel, they have no true emotional connection with the mainland China. But when you
mm,
ask them about their political views, they would say, most of them would say, no, let's just keep the status quo the way it is.
mhm,
We don't like it.
mhm,
Nobody's happy about it, but it just allows Taiwan to function as it has been functioning for the last 7 decades, right?
mm,
And it stems not just because of the love or appreciation for Beijing and Xi
mhm,
Jinping. No,
mm,
absolutely no. It's more about the fear factor. They don't want
mhm,
to be too radical because they are
mhm,
aware of the fact
mm,
that China will not, it will not
mhm,
be happy about it and might possibly
mhm,
take some retaliation against
mm,
Taiwan. And it will actually lead to some very, very radical
mm,
steps, and prompt even an invasion,
mm,
right? If
mm,
actions on the Taiwanese side are too grand and too radical, too
mm,
big, right? So I would say that we have a lot of very reasonable, rational people in Taipei.
mm, mhm,
And sometimes their views, their speeches might be appealing more or less to Beijing or
mm,
domestically speaking, because let us also remember Taiwan
mhm,
is nowadays a
mm,
democracy. They have elections, so they
mm,
have to attract people to
mm,
vote for
mm,
one party or
mm,
another. But I would say that these are people who are aware of the possible consequences, and as
Mhm.
far as they can, they will try to keep
Mhm.
the status quo. That's as optimist as I can get. Mhm.
Yeah, thank you, Antonina. I think that's the point. Like even we need some kind of rational approach. Even I can totally feel that's the fear factor that's from the Taiwanese people were their main kind of priority on this the Taiwan Strait. They first of all they don't want to have any kind of war, and secondly they were on the middle between these great powers, and they were it's really hard for them to make their kind of real choices, like either to totally pro China or pro the mainland China or totally pro the U.S. That's which will either of these kind of options will make them really a great trouble. So that's I think that's a really you pointed out that this kind of the hesitation of the Taiwanese people who which way they were will beneficial for them at most. So that's a really tricky question. I think that's we need another kind of discussion or dialogue session to discuss. Yeah, but I think the time we're nearly approached the ending of this dialogue session. I think we to wrap up. I think I will ask you, Antonina, to give the policy makers in the from the U.S. or China one or two suggestions or advice that you will give to them to navigate the uncertainty of the new U.S. administration to lower the tensions of this between the U.S. and China and to avoid the danger of the zero-sum games of the great powers. What kind of advice to the U.S. and China you will give to them?
It will sound very naive, but what we need is honesty. And I will give you
Yes.
an example. So
Mhm.
usually, among Western scholars, we often talk about
Mhm.
China as an emotional state and China
Mhm.
losing face if you do something which does not go
Yes.
along with the Beijing, right? So if Nancy Pelosi went to Taipei, oh, it was like China losing
Mhm.
face. So in order to avoid it, China had to start military drills to show its
Mhm.
strength to its own people, right, back in China, right? And so on and so forth. But we often
Yes.
forget that America can also lose its face, even though this concept does not exist in American culture
Mhm.
like it does exist in China, but
Mhm.
things work both ways. And I will give you an
Mhm.
example. So many, many years ago, when Barack Obama was still the US president, Xi Jinping told him that
Mhm.
China has no plans, no wish to militarize the South
Mhm.
China Sea, and absolutely no
Mhm.
artificial islands are being developed or being built in South China
Mhm.
Sea. And guess
Mhm.
what? Later on, the satellite pictures reveal that yes, there is an ongoing militarization of South China Sea, and
Mhm.
the Chinese army is developing artificial islands in that region, or extending, the existing little rocks and
Yes.
turning them into the islands.
Mhm.
So that didn't go very well with Americans, and they still do
Mhm.
remember that they were told one
Mhm.
thing in their face, whereas some other
Mhm.
things were happening on the
Mhm.
ground. So I think that this kind of gentleman-like level of honesty is
Mhm.
needed on
Mhm.
both sides,
Mhm.
and not like deceiving each other, not
Mhm.
hoping that I can tell you a lie straightforward and then
Mhm.
think that, oh, things will be fine, right? And we'll pretend that nothing
Mhm.
happened.
Mhm.
So what I would say in the end is that that type of understanding is needed on both sides, both in Beijing as there is in Washington. It's a very,
Mhm.
very difficult thing to achieve, but I hope that
Mhm.
this kind of honest dialogue, we understand China and US have different interests, right? Have different strategies.
Mhm.
They have different things and ideals in their mind, and we have to
Yes.
understand first. But I think that
Mhm.
there is some level of humanness that we can still
Mhm.
keep in our discussions, negotiations,
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
at least, make things more proper, let's say.
Mhm. Yes, I love the like the humanness that you mentioned. Like the people's engagement would be the first kind of steps, and the scholarly exchanges that you find that you have some obstacles. We're doing the research in China have some we need to lift it up, and also the kind of spies concerns like in the U.S. Which force a lot of Chinese professionals going back to their mainland and not prefer to stay in the U.S. That's kind of a situation we need to have to reduce, and then that's what should be the kind of the first steps for these two countries to lower their tensions and then to revive or restore the basic communication or the human humane communications. Yeah. Thank you so much, Antonina. I think this is really fruitful and really insightful and also thought-provoking discussions. Thank you for coming into the CGHK Insight Dialogue. I hope we can meet again, either online or in person, in either in Hong Kong or Taiwan or in the US. I don't know your kind of schedule in the following years, but I wish we still have this opportunity to talk with each other and to share your observations in the DC or even from Poland if we have another kind of a breakthrough in the Ukraine and the Russian conflict. Then I would love to hear from the front line from the Poland if you have something new insights or new thoughts on that. I would really appreciate if you can join us again.
Thank you, Sheldon. Thank you very much
Uh,
for your very kind invitation. I'm glad that we made it. And I also
yes.
hope some other discussions and interviews in the future because these initiatives are very, very much needed. Because
Yes.
as we agreed, this level of humanness and dialogue is the very foundation.
Thanks. Yeah, I will do. I will make another like dialogues or any other webinar like this or the human conversation like that should more happen in this policy field or in the academia so that then we can make some difference.
Wonderful. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you. And I think it's in the morning. I hope you have a great day in Poland.
Thank you. Thank you. And you have
Thank
a nice
you.
evening, Van, in Hong Kong, in
Yeah,
Shenzhen.
thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.